welcome to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. Today is Friday, March 9th, and I welcome all of you to the state's premier civic affairs event. I'm Melody Rose. I'm honored to be the president of City Club, and I would like to welcome members and guests alike, those of you who are joining us today here in the Governor Hotel, those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio, and those watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Today we will welcome Congressman Peter DeFazio for a report on transportation, timber, and what's new in D.C. But before we begin our program, I'd like to give a warm welcome to a couple of new members who are with us for the first time today. Dwayne Davis, principal broker at Realty Trust Group, and Les Wardener, retired from Xerox Corporation. If you would please stand and allow us to welcome you. We're very happy that you're here in the City Club family. City Club's corporate and media partners are essential to the vitality and the sustainability of all of the club's many activities. I'd like to thank our generous media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine. I also want to extend our deep appreciation to the Friday Forum quarterly corporate sponsors, Bank of the Cascades, Miller Nash, Perkins Coie, Stoll Reeves, and The Standard. We are so grateful. We couldn't do this work without you. And if any of you would like to join this group in sponsoring the club's activities, please do see our staff at the back of the room or pop into the City Club offices. And if you can't make it to Friday Forum on a regular basis, we have very good news. Friday Forums can now come to you. City Club is extremely excited to announce that Friday Forums are now available on iTunes in a weekly podcast. And our new YouTube channel will offer each week's video production. So we are truly bringing the club into the 21st century as we reach out to new and veteran members alike. Just search City Club Friday Forum and you can subscribe to these activities. In addition to Friday Forums, City Club is very proud to offer events throughout our wider community. This month alone, City Club's New Leaders Council is offering 3 guided tours. Participants can explore the Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge, go behind the scenes at the Dove Lewis Animal Hospital, or see the latest technology at Solar World. We are also pleased to announce a citizen salon on March 17th. Led by sociologist Randy Blazak, participants will discuss whether our city's recent spotlight on the media spotlight will affect Portland's unique character or the unique characters of Portlanders. For all of these programs and more, please go to our website, pdxcityclub.org. Following today's talk, we will be welcoming City Club members to the microphone for our traditional Q&A session with our speaker. In addition, we invite all audience members here at the Governor Hotel to locate the index cards on your tables so that you can write your questions on them while the speaker is at the podium. City Club staff will come around and collect these index cards from you, and I'll be sure to ask at least one of these of the Congressman when he's done with his prepared remarks. And now, our program. America's transportation investments seriously lag behind those of competitor nations. The U.S. spends just under 1% of its gross domestic product on transportation infrastructure, far less than either China or India. Meanwhile, on the back roads, Oregon's rural counties are struggling mightily. Federal funding for forested communities have helped support Oregon's rural counties for over a decade. With this funding, including county and timber payments, expiring, rural counties face severe impacts on their public services, and some may even face bankruptcy. Today, Congressman Peter DeFazio will examine if Congress is likely to make job-creating transportation investments and stabilize funding for Oregon's rural communities. Congressman DeFazio was first elected to the U.S. Congress in 1986. He is the Dean of the Oregon House Delegation and represents Southwest Oregon. The Congressman is the senior member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where he serves as ranking member of the Highways and Transits Subcommittee. There, he will be a key architect of the highway authorization, a 6-year federal highway and transit spending bill. He also serves on the House Natural Resources Committee, where he sits on the National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands Subcommittee, as well as the Energy and Mineral Resources Subcommittee. And with that, please help me welcome our Congressman, Peter DeFazio.
Thank you. It's great to be home. It's always great to get out of Washington, and our newest member of the delegation, Suzanne Bonamici, is here. I think we all ought to give Suzanne. She's already hard at work. She's doing a great job, and I'm really looking forward to working with her. I'm going to talk about America falling apart, and it's both sort of figurative and literal. In a literal sense, back 5 years ago, during the Bush administration, Congress authorized 2 commissions when the Republicans controlled the House, the White House, and the Senate, so they controlled everything, and they controlled the disposition and composition of these commissions. Both commissions came to the same conclusion. We are investing far less than we need to maintain our legacy systems, that is, the Eisenhower, 20th century transportation systems in this country, less than half of what we need to begin to build a 21st century fuel-efficient, less congested system. The problems are immense. National highway system, 150,000 bridges are in need of either replacement or substantial repair, and you don't have to look too far from here to note one of those potential major projects. 40% of the pavement on the national highway system has failed. That means you can't just overlay it, you've got to go in and rebuild the road. Our transit systems, that's our legacy transit systems, let alone talking about new transit systems, have a $60 billion critical infrastructure backlog. This is extraordinary. We are failing to raise and invest money at a rate that would bring our current system to a state of good repair, and that's before we even begin to consider what we would need to do to build a competitive 21st century transportation system. And as Melody stated at the outset, we are spending a fraction of our major competitor nations or future competitor nations like India, a fraction of what Brazil's spending, and even in Great Britain, where they have adopted extraordinary measures of fiscal restraint, they did not cut their investment in infrastructure. They realize it's a key to their future, to moving their goods and their people efficiently. Now, it shouldn't be a problem, right? It's always been bipartisan ever since President Eisenhower, a Republican, presented the vision, and Congress went along to build a national highway system. The idea, it's been something since the founding of the nation. Roads, are something that no one has ever disagreed we should, and the movement of people and goods, that the government didn't have an interest in. Well, it is a problem now. And this is the roots of this, I believe, come from the so-called stimulus. Some might remember I voted against the stimulus, not because I didn't want to put America back to work and make some investments, but because the stimulus, as ultimately dictated by Secretary Geithner and Larry Summers, was 43% tax cuts. As Larry Summers said, tax cuts so small people won't even see they're getting them, and they'll spend it. And I said, that's really great, Larry. That's really going to put America back to work. 7% went to investment in infrastructure. And then, but people have say, well, look, you got your stimulus, and it didn't work. I say, oh, it did work. 7% of the bill, 7% of the money we borrowed was invested in infrastructure, and it created more than 30% of the jobs that can legitimately be attributed to that legislation. What did the little consumptive tax cuts create? Debt, in my opinion, and nothing else. But unfortunately, with all of the partisan furor around the stimulus and what came from that, there's this new mythology that investing in transportation and infrastructure will not put America back to work. And we're fighting with that very much. Now, the Republicans took over the House in the last election, as you all know. They adopted one new rule, which is crippling anything we want to do in this area, and that is a rule that says that you can have no new revenues for any purpose. And if you do raise revenues, you must reduce taxes somewhere else by a similar amount. We have traditionally had a user-pays system for transportation in this country. It made a lot of sense. We should continue to have a user-pays system, not necessarily with a retail gas tax. But they're saying, can't do that. Got to live within your current means. Well, the economy's still not too great. Cars are becoming more efficient, and the revenues are actually down for the Surface Transportation Trust Fund. Then comes the Ryan budget. The Ryan budget proposed that we reduce spending below revenues on transportation infrastructure. That's just an extraordinary thing. That was adopted in the House. He would cut our investment, which is already about half of what we need to begin to build a state of good repair and a new system, by 25%, walking away from our obligations. Now, there are a couple of reasons for this. One is a guy named Grover Norquist, who's got most all the Republicans to sign this pledge saying no new revenues for any purpose. And Grover, being a certifiably smart guy, also has developed a new theory of transportation, which is called devolution. I don't know if you've heard about it, but the idea is there is no federal interest in the United States of America in a coordinated national transportation system. It should be devolved to the 50 states, and the gas tax should go away. That's his vision. Unfortunately, there's probably 80 members of the Republican caucus who have bought into this nonsense, that this should be something done by the states. I've been waiting for the debate on the floor for a long time. Hasn't happened yet because they don't have a bill yet. But I have a great photo, which is the Kansas Turnpike circa 1956, before we had a national system, and the turnpike ends in a farmer's field in the next state. That's where devolution will get us. How are we going to serve our ports? The goods don't just come into Portland. They don't just come into L.A., and they don't just go out of L.A. They come from everywhere in the western U.S. But that's not something that is in the national interest to support that movement, or the movement of people in our economic beating hearts of the country and our major urban areas to deal with congestion and all the other problems and create livable cities. That's not in the federal interest. In this world, it's not. It's so bad that the Speaker actually said, trying to convince his caucus to move forward with their transportation bill, he noted he has never voted for a surface transportation bill. He also recently said, we're not making the claim that spending taxpayer money on transportation projects creates jobs. We don't make that claim, and we won't make that claim. Well, every economist out there says that actually for every $1 billion we spend, we create about 30,000 jobs, not just in construction, in manufacturing, because we have strong Buy America requirements, or we have Oregon Iron Works over here building the first made-in-America streetcars in 70 years due to one of those horrible earmarks that I put in the last transportation bill that gave Portland the authority to go out and contract for a made-in-America streetcar. So we can't have earmarks, and we apparently can't have spending. Now, the policy that, I wouldn't urge anybody to suffer through the thing, but we had an 18-hour markup. As I said, this has always been bipartisan. The last time I was in the minority, when the Republicans had the House, the White House, and the Senate, I was one of the principal negotiators dealing with the Senate on doing a surface transportation bill, even though I was a Democrat. This time, they wouldn't even show us what they were proposing until the week we were going to mark that bill up in committee, 800-page bill. At the beginning of the markup, we asked, because you might remember the refrain from the last election, read the bill, read the bill. Well, we said, hey, how many people here in this room have read this bill? Nobody raised their hand. Chairman said, well, I've read some of it. And I said, well, I've read some of it too. But, so that's where we started. And the policy was extraordinary. It was Ronald Reagan who said transit should be part of the Highway Trust Fund. Ronald Reagan. And it has been ever since. Now, we fought hard with the Senate in the last authorization over what share goes to transit, but transit got a dedicated revenue source to meet our needs, and you know how we've been a tremendous beneficiary of those transit investments. They would take transit out of the Highway Trust Fund in their proposal. They zeroed out any what are called enhancements, which would be things that deal with pedestrians, cycling, and other sorts of non-traditional movement of goods and people. Zeroed it out. The environment, I'll just tell you one quick story, because sometimes it's just kind of fun. This was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I had read part of the bill. I had identified what I thought was a pretty extreme provision. Here's what it said. And the president, at this point, I think when they drafted it, they were assuming Obama wasn't going to win re-elections, because the president would have the authority to declare an infrastructure project, not defined, to be in the national competitiveness interest, not defined, and the president could proceed with that project exempt from all the laws of the United States of America, all the laws of the United States of America, and, oh wait, it gets better, and barred from judicial review. There would be no judicial review of the president's decision. Now, we had an 18-hour markup. I brought this up about 1 in the morning, and they had this Republican guy, and the staff had given him talking points to defend the indefensible, so he starts reading, and he says, we just want to expedite things here, and that's why we're doing this, because we have to expedite these projects. Of course, not a word, and that was written by the staff, not by him, and those are the same people who drafted the bill. So then I began to engage them in a little give and take. I said, well, can I make, would you give me a little time here? I said, oh, yeah, sure. I said, okay, so look, I said, what about takings? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, government shall not take your property without due process and compensation. And they said, well, yeah. I said, well, there would be no more restrictions on the government taking. I said, it would be kind of like the Chinese model. They knock on your door, say, get out, here comes the bulldozer. That's it. I mean, it would expedite projects a lot. But, it's not exactly the American way. And, they're like, well, people could still go to court. And I said, no, you could not exert your constitutional claim because you're barred from going to court. And then they turn to the council and say, well, council, we can't do that, can we? And he said, oh, yeah, you can. It's in the bill, So, and then one of my more clever colleagues pipes in. He says, hey, this is great. He said the president could bring in illegal immigrants to build these projects, and it would be cheap labor. So now they're starting to get a little nervous. So then they start saying, well, Mr. Chairman, we think this needs a little tweaking. So I did succeed and stripped that provision from the bill, although I probably shouldn't have, because it's a good story, but it would have been an even better talking point on the floor. There are many, and I'm not going to go through them all, other problems with what they've done. I still am hopeful. They cannot get the votes on their side to do this because of the 80 or so who want devolution and don't believe there's a federal interest, and the 20 or so Republicans who think we should still be doing transit. So between those two dynamics, they cannot muster the votes on their side. They had several long meetings this week, and they are back to they got the ultimate threat. Speaker Boehner gave them the ultimate threat. And that was, he said, look, if you won't do what we want to do, this bill that came out of that committee, then we're going to make you vote on the Senate bill, which is actually pretty good policy. And that's such a great threat that we might vote on a bill that's actually bipartisan and would be a good 2-year placeholder for transportation investment. He thinks that'll motivate them to vote for something worse. So we'll see. There's a fellow named Steve LaTourette, who's a moderate on the committee, who objected to many of these provisions. And he's approached me and a couple of other Democrats on the committee and saying, look, he thinks they're going to end up having to ask for Democratic votes. And he said, what do we need to fix? And we've talked about what we need to fix in the bill. And, maybe we will end up there. I don't know. Can we get back to the tradition that we've had for more than half a century? There's plenty of partisan issues out there. Come on. I mean, every day I can find, we can have great fun with partisan issues. Transportation does not need to be a partisan issue. There's no reason to walk away from what we need to do, one of the most basic things this government can do for the economy of this country and our future, beyond investments in education and other things, but is, an efficient national transportation network. My vision, the one I offered 2 years ago, would have spent about $200 billion a year more, and people say, well, how would you pay for it? Well, there's a lot of ways to pay for it. My favorite was taxing oil by the barrel. a $1 tax on a barrel of oil, and the market just went up and down, more than that as I've been talking in terms of speculation on oil futures, would raise $4 billion a year. So a $5 tax on a barrel of oil would raise what we would need to do a $450 billion bill to begin to build out a 21st century infrastructure and rebuild our legacy infrastructure here. And the impacts wouldn't just come down to the pump, because OPEC is always manipulating the price, and they have price targets. Well, some of it might come out of OPEC. Some of it might come out of ExxonMobil and the other oil companies who had $147 billion of profits last year. Some might come out of the refiners, the distributors. Yeah, a little bit of it, I'm sure, would leak through at the pump. But that would be a pretty fair way to make investments that we all need. There are other ways, indexing the gas tax and doing some bonding. I can justify borrowing money to make investments. One of the big problems we have in Washington, D.C. is we don't have capital budgets. So a consumptive purchase by the government counts exactly the same in the budgetary process as an investment by the government. And that's in part what stymies us. So, I'm hoping, we can get back to that. I'm hoping we at least do what the Senate has proposed for the next 2 years, and I'm hoping the next election will bring in some other people who want to make these needed investments. I want to talk briefly about another subject. I want to leave a lot of time for questions. As was mentioned in the introductory remarks, I represent the southwest part of the state. I have actually the 37th largest district in land area in Congress. Very large, very diverse, very resource dependent outside of my major urban areas and my universities. And we have some very unique lands. We're more than half owned by the federal government. A lot of those are United States Forest Service, but we have some other lands that are absolutely statutorily unique. 2.3 million acres of land that are called O&C lands, Oregon and California. It was a railroad that was to be built in the 1870s. They got every other section of land, and then they were supposed to, that land was supposed to be sold to homesteaders and settlers. Long, complicated story. Ultimately, the federal government took the land back, even though it was privately held and on the tax rolls. They took the land back and said, well, we know we're taking a whole bunch of land off your tax rolls, so we will essentially make you a pledge. And the O&C Act is that pledge, that the counties would share in the timber revenues, which should be produced on a sustainable basis, for all time. With what we have now with gridlock in our forests, there is no revenue. We've had some temporary guarantees, and we got a little breathing room maybe yesterday from the Senate for another temporary guarantee at a very low level. We do have counties in southwest Oregon that are on the verge of, and there's no way to go bankrupt in Oregon, dissolution essentially, devolving their prime duties back to the state, which can't afford them, or to the next county, which can't afford them. Ultimately, I've had discussions with people. This is all untested. It's thinking it will bounce from county to county to county to county. And I said, well, if Curry goes down, then Coos goes down. If Coos goes down, then Douglas and Lane go down. And if Douglas and Lane go down, I said, probably it doesn't stop till it gets to Multnomah. Thank you very much if you help us pay for all these things. But it can't work that way. We've got to do better. And we need two things. We need a bridge with some more temporary guarantees, and we need a long-term revenue source off those lands, which would be delivering on the O&C promise. This is an Oregon story because it's actually a bipartisan proposal, and bipartisanship is very rare in Washington, D.C. these days. And I sat down with Kurt Schrader, who represents a fair number of this, and myself and Greg Walden, who represent the bulk of these counties. And we spent quite some time hammering out a bill. It is not the bill that I would have written. It's certainly not the bill that Greg would have written. But we agreed that this was so important that we had to agree with the prospect of this being moved through the House as a longer-term solution. I've been involved in forest wars for 27 years. It started as a fight over old growth, and it's going to end, if I have my way, by preserving the old growth. That's what I want to do. It is not done now. The Clinton Forest Plan, in fact, Northwest Forest Plan, is principally dependent upon harvesting old-growth timber. No one knew it. At the time, I'd read it. I did know it. I didn't support it. I said, this isn't going to settle the dispute. It will not give us a predictable supply of timber, and it's going to leave old growth exposed. And the only way old growth is being protected is through administrative action and endless appeals and litigation and all that. So what we've decided to do is scientifically define old growth, move virtually all of the old growth onto Forest Service lands, prohibit anything other than, dealing with fires or, other sorts of forest health or safety things, any active management in those lands, but then take the other little more than 1 million acres of the O&C lands and put them into active management and create a public trust in the state of Oregon with members of a board named by the governor of Oregon to govern that trust. And put in place a long-term timber management plan. Half of the land would be managed generally the states manage forests, which is 60 to 80 years of what they call rotation of age. The other half would be managed to 120 years of age. So you get environmental benefits. It includes a requirement that this be done using integrated pest management. It includes a large wilderness addition to the Rogue Wilderness, protecting tributaries of the Rogue River. It includes my Devil's Staircase Wilderness. It includes wild and scenic from the Malala River and other rivers at the behest of Kurt Schrader. This would have been 10 or 15 years ago something the conservation community said, what an unbelievable victory. But no, now they're saying, no, this is the worst thing. They're going to liquidate these lands. They're going to clear cut them, whatever. And they think they can forever defend old growth against a Congress, an administration, and the Supreme Court. I don't buy that. There is a case perking along now that may well go to the Supreme Court that would mandate about 1 billion board feet a year be cut off the O&C lands, which is substantially a lot more than our plan would have harvested. I'm working hard on that. It's not clear, whether or not we're going to be allowed to do that because we're running into another weird rule they've adopted. They claim that you can do nothing that principally impacts one state. That's called an earmark also. But this is policy, and policy has never been earmarks, but we've been having a problem negotiating our way into the bill, but I think I figured out a way to do it, and we actually just had our staff meet with a parliamentarian, and the parliamentarian said, yeah, that would work. That would not be an earmark. So we'll see. This may be decided in a couple of weeks and in terms of the House, and then the Senate has attached the temporary funding to the transportation bill in the Senate. So if we took up the Senate transportation bill, then we'd get our temporary money, although that's going to be problematic again in the House. But, I think it would be an Oregon solution to an Oregon problem, and would be good both for the environment and certainly for the people resident in those counties and people who work in resource-based industries in the southwest part of our state. So with that, I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for spending time with us and preserving time to have a dialogue with our members. Those of you in the audience who have written an index card question, please hold it up high now so that the staff can come around and collect it from you, and I will read them from the microphone at the table. The first question for our speaker, as always, comes from the Friday Forum host. Today's host is City Club Governor Leslie Morehead. Leslie is a consultant providing financial management services for small businesses. She received the City Club's Research Award in 2007 and the Club's Member of the Year Award in 2010. Leslie.
Thank you, Melody. Congressman DeFazio, you talked about oil speculation, and you've been in the papers and on the news recently about a proposal you have about taxing this purchase of oil futures. I don't intend to ask you specifically about that proposal, but when I think about oil speculation, I immediately think about speculation in the housing market, and we all are all too familiar with the effect that had on crashing the economy in the last 4 or 5 years. So could you talk more about oil speculation in the context of contrasting it or comparing it to housing speculation and what the effect could be on the economy? How are they similar and how are they different?
Thank you. Great question. I'll focus a little bit on oil speculation, then try and get to the greater issue. Back when I was trying to figure out how to fund this transportation bill, when we were in the majority 2 years ago, I just saw one day the figure on how many trillions of dollars of outstanding oil contracts there were, and I thought, well, what if there were just a minuscule tax on each one of those transactions? 1 penny on $100 value of trade. 1 penny on $100 value of trade. Well, that could probably raise a lot of money to help us pay for, our transportation needs. So you have to send these things off to a committee called Joint Tax if you're serious about a proposal and you have to have it scored. So I sent it off, and they called a couple times with questions, and and then finally one day my staff, I think I was out here in Oregon, gives me a call and says, "Hey, we got the score back from Joint Tax." I said, "Great, how much money does it raise?" And she says, "Well, it doesn't raise any money." I said, "What do you mean? There's trillions of dollars of trade. Multiply that times 0.001. And she said, "Yeah, I know, but what they said is that these people are churning so quickly on such minuscule margins that if they had to pay 1 penny per $100 of trade, they would stop speculating." I said, "Well, that would be good, wouldn't it?" So, somehow we built a great nation and we had liquidity in our markets before we allowed non-end users, i.e. speculators, to dominate the markets. Today, 70% of the oil futures are held by financial services companies. 70%. 30% is hedged by people who have some intention of using that as fuel, and they're in business, and they should be allowed to do that. That's the way it's been. But with the Enron Amendment and the deregulation of these markets, now the speculators run the market. Goldman Sachs' own internal documents say it adds between $20 and $30 a barrel, just so people can make money speculating. And there's also other estimates out there that are even higher. The head of ExxonMobil last spring testified before Congress that they shouldn't blame us and our profits. He says 60 to 70 cents per gallon at the pump is going to Wall Street. So why don't we do something about that? I wrote to the president this week and asked, because I think he has a credible, longer-term plan to deal with our energy needs. But he's, like others, saying, well, there's nothing we can do short-term. And I just said, look, I like all the other stuff you're doing, but there is a way to deal with this short-term, provide tremendous relief and a boost to the economy by just getting these speculators out of the market. And if we do it with a minuscule tax, and if joint tax is wrong, maybe we'll raise a little money too. But one way or another, it would have a tremendous beneficial effect. I have another bill, which I've done with Senator Tom Harkin, which deals more generally with the issues of speculative trading. There's a great rap video, if you ever want to watch it. You can get a link to it on my during the Occupy Wall Street on Wall Street by a guy named J.C. Moneypenny. And if you ever thought you could do a good rap video about a transaction tax, this guy hit it. And he starts with talking about Tobin, who was a famous Nobel Prize-winning economist, and the theories of the Tobin tax, and he raps the whole thing out. I get a good shout out, and it's kind of fun. But the bottom line is it makes sense. People as notable as Larry Summers, President's former economic advisor, wrote academic papers on the benefit of reining in speculation and the volatility it causes in our market and all the inefficiencies it causes, with people saying, what happened with mortgages was there were not enough bad mortgages to go around, so they had to create synthetic collateralized debt obligations, and then they had to create synthetic insurance, credit default insurance on the synthetic bets. So if we had just settled on the value of, the difference between the value of those properties and what was owed, the cost would have been about 1/10 of what was incurred by Wall Street, because they took a $1 billion package of bad mortgages and turned it into a $10 billion equity with bets on both sides. And we're still paying the impact of that. So Tom Harkin and I have another bill, which is more generally on speculation. This one would generate revenues. It's been scored also. It would create about $35 billion a year of revenues. and would substantially rein in some of the most volatile and exotic of these speculative trades, so we wouldn't have another housing bubble and collapse. So I think these are serious issues, need to be dealt with. Unfortunately, I would say the worst aspect of this administration has been the economic team, and Larry Summers and Timothy Geithner are adamantly opposed to this idea, even though Larry wrote an academic paper saying what a great idea it would be. Remember, he got fired by Harvard, he went to Wall Street, he worked part-time for a year, and they paid him $5 million. So he knows wealth is made on Wall Street. And unfortunately, I have no idea why Obama chose him as his principal economic advisor. And it's been a disaster. If you read the book, the tell-all supposed book about the Obama administration, at one point the president said, hey, this is a good idea, let's tax speculators. And Geithner and Summers says, yes, sir. And he says, bring me back a proposal. Yes, sir. That was the end of that discussion. So we've got to get back to this, and I hope the president will join me in looking at this 1 penny per $100 speculated on oil futures.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll now take questions from the floor, and as always, we invite members to the microphone to ask their questions. Asking questions at the microphone is a privilege of club membership, so we invite you to identify yourself as a club member and ask your questions in under 30 seconds, or you'll see the famous City Club question mark to remind you to wrap up. Also, we do have some index cards from the table, so I'll interject from time to time with one of those.
Good morning, Congressman. I'll make this as expeditious as possible. Within the confines of the bill that you proposed on the forests, what is the definition of old growth now?
There is no agreed upon definition, and we have a provision that a board of scientists would be chosen, and they would parse through the existing literature. No research is necessary. And come up with a definition of old growth that would fit. And old growth is unique to different ecosystems in different places. The estimates are we would be looking at somewhere between 140 and 160 years and up, but we don't really know. I've talked to Drs. Franklin and Johnson about this. I've worked with them a lot over the last 20 years on forestry issues. That's a best guess, but they said, it would take a peer-reviewed study, go through the literature, put it out for peer review, but we'd end up in that ballpark.
Morning. Leslie Lewis, member, and I'm also a member of Transition PDX. I'm wondering, is anybody in Washington talking about peak oil? And in your opinion, are we making adequate preparations as a country for the coming rising prices for oil-based energy sources?
It's a great question. No, there is total denial about peak oil among the new majority, as well as global climate change, which they won't acknowledge. And now, of course, there's a lot of excitement that with the new techniques of oil shale fracking or fracking for natural gas. I just read some Pollyannish study very recently that said we may become energy independent in the very near future. There are some problems associated with this. It needs to be done in a much more regulated form than it has been done so far. There are places where I'm sure it's appropriate and you can do it safely, and there's others where it isn't, and you get other problems with methane. It's a whole host of issues. So I don't think we're on any rush to energy self-sufficiency. And in fact, right now, we are exporting a refined fuel from the U.S. So at the moment, we're sort of in this place. But what I've said for years is, we've kind of got time before the big crunch hits. And when the big crunch hits, the price of everything goes up because, plastics, everything manufactured out of oil products as the shortage comes. I said we need to use that intervening time period to become much more energy efficient. And this is where I would give the president high marks in his vision on moving toward alternate fuels. And that was a big deal to get that pledge out of Detroit on higher mileage standards. That was huge. But that's just a beginning of more things we need to do to become more efficient. So.
Take one from the tables now. You've probably convinced most people in this audience that major transportation investments need to be made. But transportation investments carry huge price tags, and we've also got a major debt problem. How can we simultaneously make necessary transportation investments while also bringing our national debt under control?
Well, I would go so far as to say if we went out and borrowed the money at current Treasury rates of about 1%, and we put 3 million people to work next year on the 150,000 bridges, 40% of the highway system, and the $60 billion backlog on transit, which is all manufacturing, all made in America because of the toughest made in America requirements around transportation, we would generate more revenues than our amortization would cost by far. So you could do it with borrowed money, but you don't have to do it with borrowed money. Because I talked about it earlier. You could do it with a barrel tax. You could do it by indexing the current gas tax to fleet fuel economy and construction cost inflation, and then bonding that. I have estimates on that from the Department of Transportation. If we just did that, it would mean about a penny increment per year to keep the gas tax from declining in value. And the estimates are we could bond as much as $120 billion up front, paid off over 20 years with that increment. So there are ways to do that. Oregon, we bonded. That's how we did it, and we're paying it back out of the gas tax. So, this is not exactly rocket science. There are ways to do this and these investments we need to make. The American Society of Civil Engineers last year came out with an extraordinary report, not just their usual scorecard showing, how all our infrastructure is failing. And it's not just roads, bridges, highways, transit. It's jetties, it's levees, it's dams. Where I am, down on the southern Willamette Valley, our dams on the Willamette River, critical if we ever get a rain on snow event like the big floods in the 60s, can only operate at 85% of capacity because the spillways have all worn out because they're 50 years old and they're past their expected lifespan. And the United States of America doesn't have $100 million to replace them. Of course, a flood all the way downstream to Portland is going to cost the Federal Emergency Management Agency a heck of a lot more than $100 million. If we're lucky, we won't lose any lives, but it's going to cost a lot more. So we need to make these investments. There's got to be, we should have a capital budget. We should say investments are one thing, and you can borrow money to make investments. I try and explain it to some of my colleagues in a very simple way. I said, look, if you're in business and you walk in and you say, hey, boy, times are tough, I need a big loan for payroll, you're not very likely to walk out of the bank with a loan. If you walk into the same bank and say, hey, I got a plan here, to invest. Here's the market share. Here's my business plan. Here's where I'm going with this. I need this for new plant and equipment. You might come out with a loan. So that's the same thing we need to do federally. And I would say there are critical investments. And one of them is infrastructure, movement of goods and people, critical to our economic competitiveness in a world economy. And the other is education, and we're short in both of them by far.
Hi, Brad Perkins. I'm running for Metro District 5. I remember you way back when, the days down in Springfield, before you were a politician, fighting whoops with the boldness that you still have today. And in respect to the late Senator Wayne Morris, I like to refer to you as the tiger in the house.
The highest compliment you could pay. Wayne, I have a great photo of Wayne in my office. We have a lot of late night conversations. He's pretty appalled at what's going on back there, let me tell you.
Thank you. Now for my question. There is a road rail bridge alternative to the CRC, or Columbia Road Crossing, that has been designed by an engineer and will be proposed to the Oregon Legislature CRC Oversight Committee next Friday as part of a presentation by the Smarter Bridge Committee. It is planned to be built next to the existing freight rail bridge at 138 feet high, with 4 lanes for cars and trucks and 4 tracks on the deck below for freight, high-speed rail, and rapid transit that will get commuters to the Rhodes Corridor in 7 minutes from Vancouver. Given that the $144 million plans for the current CRC bridge are 43 feet short, port interchanges improvements are now suggested to be removed at Marine Drive and Mill Plain for reducing the cost, and our state legislature won't consider funding for the CRC debacle until February 2013. Would you push ODOT and WSDOT to study a viable alternative that clearly will remove congestion on the existing I-5 bridge by being a new transportation artery 1.3 miles downriver and pull traffic from West Vancouver, North Portland, and the ports via existing roads and rails, and at the same time, freight companies and high-speed rail funds could help share the costs of this thing. But it would keep the existing I-5 bridge there, but build a new artery next down by the freight bridge.
Look, I don't do design. I mean, from the beginning, when they first came to talk to me about CRC, I said, keep it modest. And unfortunately, I think, especially in the first iteration, they got together the WashDOT and the ODOT engineers and said, okay, design an optimal highway engineering solution to deal with a 15-mile corridor, and that's what they came up with. I think this governor has done a good job, and at the time they were coming in to me with these price tags, and I had just been to France to see a beautiful bridge at Millau, France, which is a bridge which goes over a gorge and has pylons that are thousands of feet high. The bridge is monitored by computers. It's become a tourist attraction. It has mitigated this horrible congestion, and the bridge costs $850 million. And I would pull out the book with that when they come to me and say, they built this for $850 million. You can't tell me it's going to cost $4 billion to go across the Columbia River. And, so I have been raising concerns all along. I think Governor Kitzhaber has took the lead and said, wait a minute, we've got to look for something that's affordable. We're going to pull back a little bit here. He has, named, he has, a lead person working for him on this. I'd be interested in any alternatives, but if there is an alternative that's viable, and, someone mentioned that when they had their little, not hearing, but whatever you would call that meeting we had up in Vancouver with John Micah, the chair of the committee. Someone mentioned this option, but someone else said, well, where does it go to? Because, what neighborhoods do you have to disrupt? I don't know. I'm not an expert on it, but I have worked with Lynn Peterson, former commissioner, who's also on the governor's staff now, when we had a problem over here on the Sunrise, when ODOT dusted off 35-year-old plans that were totally inappropriate. And would have bisected the Oregon Iron Works property, wiped out their new test track, and been not good for the neighborhood and saved 30 seconds per trip or something at a huge cost. And, we managed to, I have intervened and helped local officials who have better ideas, and in that case, she was a commissioner, she had a better idea, and I helped. And I've tried to put appropriate design principles in my proposed version of a national highway reauthorization. I'm not sure they will get in to, they're considered controversial by the Republicans, so I doubt I'll be able to get appropriate design into this bill. But certainly they should look at any and every alternative. The one caveat would be, even if there is an alternative that could deal with the problems and the issues, and of course we have the light rail too, which we want to extend, and I'm not sure how that fits into that plan exactly, but the bottom line is those two bridges that are there now are still going to need a lot of investment, because neither of them meets seismic standards, and they're pretty old. So if you're talking about keeping the existing bridges and building something else, you're still going to have to deal with the existing bridges, and I don't know what that would do to the total price tag. But I would certainly urge the legislature and the governor and the task force to look at anything and everything. So.
Chris Andre, City Club member. Thank you so much for whenever I hear you speak, or for example, HR, I think it's 3913, which obviously prevents the outrageous abuse of eminent domain. Hope is restored, so thank you for that. My question returns us to the rural communities, timber issues. This obviously has been around since we had lots of trees and not so many people. Now we've got lots of people, not so many trees. While we are considering why we're trying to come up with a number to assign to what is an old growth forest, maybe we ought to start thinking also about computing the value of natural capital, because as our forests dwindle and they become scarcer, the value obviously goes up. And I'm wondering, while rural communities continue to enjoy what I regard as a form of welfare, that perhaps what alternatives to timber management are we considering are before us. Because, you know, managed forest is really just a tree farm, and it does, in fact, the ultimate end game is privatization of the forest, another topic. But what alternatives are being considered right now?
Well, a number of environmental groups put out an alternative that is not based in reality. First, they have a chart showing minuscule increases in property taxes would take care of a third of the problem. When my staff pointed out the chart was based on the total value of taxes in each county and not on the county share, which is a very small part of that, they said, yeah, you're right, it's wrong, but we're not going to change it. Number two, they said, well, we'll save $110 million a year by moving lands from O&C to the Forest Service. Well, I went down that path 2 years ago, and I made the Forest Service didn't want to study it. I made them study it, and they said, no, actually, there's no savings because of the different management requirements, especially if you're going to produce any sort of timber on those lands. And then number three would be the state would quadruple the severance tax, and a state which is already short of funds would then dedicate those monies to the counties. I'm not aware of any legislator who has proposed that. I think I would like to look at changing the severance tax because I tried to stop the export of private logs from Oregon and elsewhere in the U.S., couldn't do it. I did get the permanent ban on federal logs. And I think a way to deal with private logs, which is becoming a problem for our mills, because the Chinese will pay the China price for logs that they don't even, beautiful Douglas fir that they will use for construction forms. Because they don't care. It's only $600, $700 a thousand. They're rich. We could look at adjusting the severance tax to incentivize domestic manufacturing here. If you adjusted the tax up and said, okay, if you want to export the logs, you're going to pay the full tax. If you sell into production, you get a production rebate here. So there's things along those lines. Scientifically, I have had Jerry Franklin and Norm Johnson, who were part of the original Gang of Four. I've worked with them for over 20 years out there doing some pilot projects, which I got funded on the O&C lands. Which would look at a different form of forestry. And one of the things that came out, which is really fascinating, and I didn't know, and I know a lot about forestry, is that the rarest form of forest in southwest Oregon now is called early seral stage, i.e. something that would happen after a natural event where you have a lot of things that herbivores like to eat, So with broadleaf and all that, ultimately the forest comes up through it. It's a natural process. Under industrial forest practices, we don't get that, even though we're harvesting most of our timber on private lands, because they go in and dump huge amounts of herbicides and pesticides there because they think it gets them more reproduction, and they have studies to show that. I would want to prohibit the use of herbicides and pesticides on these lands. I couldn't quite get Greg there, but we did get they're required to use IPM, integrated pest management, in order to encourage early seral stage development. So we're going to get early seral development with these harvest practices. We're going to preserve the old growth. We're going to have half the land in a rotation of 120 years and the other there, and it's going to be a very patchwork sort of thing. I think that there would be dramatic environmental values, and if you go visit these lands, and most people haven't because they aren't lands you recreate on, they are not national forests. They are not, the more outstanding lands. I've stood by the side of the road and peered into some of these that are going to just burn up down in southern Oregon that are just a mess where we're doing nothing. I would argue that, the way we're dividing these lands, the things that we value most, which are clean water, recreation, other things other than timber values, are going to be preserved and enhanced by saving the old growth. Or if you want to roll the dice, we can say, let's take the status quo, see what the Supreme Court does when they get a case on harvesting the rest of the old growth. I'm not willing to bet on that.
Kurt Wavering, member. You serve in a House which is controlled by Republicans now, and a lot of people notice, not just then, but now rather, but the discourse in Washington is marked by an extreme degree of bipartisanship.
Or lack thereof, you mean?
And Senator Snowe, a longtime centrist Republican, has decided she's not going to run again. I guess my question is, what can be done to promote civil discourse in D.C.?
I got to change the system. And the two principal causes of what I believe is, this extraordinary spectacle we're having is the way we do redistricting, particularly in the House of Representatives, which is scientifically based and done to enhance partisan advantage. Oregon did not do that. Iowa, which has a commission form, doesn't do that. California is experimenting with a commission. A number of very senior members of Congress aren't in their districts anymore. But the way the system has worked and evolved over the last 20 years, particularly with a Supreme Court case in Texas, is you can redistrict to partisan advantage, and Tom DeLay got the Supreme Court to say you can redistrict as many times as you want in 10 years for partisan advantage. He picked up 11 seats in Texas by getting a mid-decade redistricting. What that means is the only election is the primary. There is no general election for all intents and purposes. Those are seats you can't lose if you're in one party or the other. And that leads to people who are in the extremes in both parties and very few people in the middle. I have a swing district. It's pretty rare these days in Washington, D.C. It's, maybe Charlie Cook says 60 to 80 are true swing districts. The rest of them are either Republican or Democratic. That's it. So the primary is the whole race. So dealing with redistricting in the House, that of course doesn't deal with the Senate problem because they're statewide. The other issue is money. The flood of money. And, the fact with, Citizens United and other cases that, you have very powerful forces that are choosing people. I mean, we have people, I used to say like billionaires bought racehorses. Now they buy presidential candidates. There's probably the Republican race would be over today if it wasn't for super PACs and 3 or 4 billionaires. Now, that's a heck of a way to run a government. So I don't believe money is speech. I think the Supreme Court was, unbelievably activist and wrong to overturn 100 years of precedent banning corporate money and overturning other precedents of the court more recent and saying that the only thing that's corrupting is quid pro quo corruption. You can say to me, I'll give you $1 million for your campaign and like to chat with you afterwards. That's fine. If you say, I can give you $1 million and this is the way I want you to vote, oh, that would be bad. What's the difference? But the Supreme Court says there's a difference. There's one hope. There's a case coming out of Montana where they can actually factually prove corruption that resulted from this system, and that's why they have limits on their campaigns. And, we'll see if they'll take cert. Maybe they even will be appalled at what they have brought here, but I'm not sure they will be. We're basically, putting our democracy up for sale, in my opinion, with the current system. And this is going to be a very, very ugly election. And it's going to elect more people who they've signed Grover's pledge and they believe in devolution. The federal government has no business running a national transportation system. That's nuts.
Go ahead.
Barb Wolf, City Club member. Regarding national transportation, there was a great deal of talk about fast trains a while back, and I'm wondering if there's any future plans for that. Also, if there's any way...
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite...
I'm sorry, fast trains.
Oh, yeah, okay, sure.
And also our current trains, in which we share tracks between passenger and freight, which makes it very inefficient and very, shall I say, late. So any thoughts on that?
Sure. With the exception of the Northeast Corridor, which the federal government owns because of a bankruptcy of a railroad and a takeover, all of the rest of the trains are run on shared track. The right-of-way and the tracks are owned by the freight railroads. And so unless, you want to build a new dedicated right-of-way, which California is trying to do, and now they're beginning to realize how difficult that's going to be in a fairly crowded society. We've got to deal with the freight railroads, and I've tried in working with them for years. Oregon has actually done a pretty good job. Connect Oregon, I have suggested as a federal model. Let's partner with them. They got to move freight, we want to move people. Is there a way we can both get ahead here? And what Oregon has done is they've partnered with the railroads to build some additional sidings between here and Eugene, which have mitigated some of the delays. We need to do a lot more of that. Oregon is also looking at the potential for a different route on a much less used section of rail. Oregon has yet to come forward with a proposal or plan, but they're looking at a Class 2. Part of it's the old Oregon Electric. I mean, it's amazing what we've lost in this country. About a year or two before Mark Hatfield died, I went up to visit him, and we were just chatting, and he was just reminiscing about when he was a kid, and he lived somewhere, I can't remember, on the, fairly far out of Salem, out in that area, and they used to take what they called the skunk, which was a one-car electric train, over to the Red Line, and then you could take the Red Line to Eugene or Portland. And it's like, wow. So we're trying to recapture what we had, but we've lost the right-of-way, and it's harder now. What we need to start thinking about is faster trains, because that's feasible in dealing with, and working with the railroads on shared track. High-speed trains, when you look at high-speed trains around the world, I think virtually all of them, and in fact, I think all of them are on their own dedicated track. A much more difficult prospect. So, yeah. Okay, I'm out of time. I'm getting the hook. So.
Thank you. We've unfortunately run out of time for further questions. But we're very grateful that you shared so much with us and preserved the time for this dialogue. It's very useful to us. Please join us next week for a legislative wrap-up with Senators Ted Ferrioli and Diane Rosenbaum. And as we close for today, let's give our thanks to Congressman Peter DeFazio. We will look for that transportation tax wrap. Thank you. We are adjourned.